Daniel here from SMS Retro, and what you are about to see are a selection of 10 of my favourite games for the Sega Master System. Now I have to stress that not only are these games most definitely not the top 10 best games for the system, although that is a topic worthy of its own video, but it's even debatable whether the 10 presented here are even my own actual top 10 favourites for certain. Settling on just the 10 here was hard enough, meaning that trying to put them into any kind of defined order was definitely out of the question. There are some notable absences perhaps, and maybe the odd left field choice, but isn't that the point of these lists? They are there to provoke debate and discussion, maybe even fury and ridicule, and no doubt you will all have your own favourites in mind, but I at least hope I've managed to justify strongly enough why each game featured here warrants its appearance. So then, in no particular order, it's the Sega Master System, it's 1986, it's the attempt at establishing a new mascot. I can't really start with anything else, can I? Ask anyone with just a passing interest in video games in the late 80s to early 90s to name the first game that comes to mind when they think of the Sega Master System, and I'm pretty certain that a very high percentage of them, especially in Europe, would choose Alex Kidd in Miracle World, a game published and developed by Sega and first released in 1986. And for good reason. You play as Alex, who you will learn is a member of the Redaxian royal family and who have been overthrown by Janken the Great and his henchmen. Your job is to free the captured royal family members and friends, as well as locating a set of treasures in order to bring peace to the city. Much more than your standard left to right platforming game, Miracle World further features strategy, puzzle and light RPG elements, with all these combining superbly to give it what many have dubbed it as an epic adventure feel. Across varied and distinct locations with crisp, colourful graphics, and of course that theme song, Alex will swim in rivers, ride motorbikes, navigate speedboats and fly pedalcopters on his way to the confrontation with Janken's henchmen and the battle with Janken himself. And if you can think of a better way to settle a score than by doing so with rock paper scissors, I would really like to know. It is a winning combination that still holds up as one of the Master System's best games to this day, fondly remembered by the great majority who, like myself, grew up with it from a younger age. The decision by Sega to include this as a built-in packing game for the relaunch of the Sega Master System 2 console in 1990 meant that this was most people's first Master System game that they would have played. This was indeed the case for me, and the choice by Sega to do so was an inspired one. I was instantly hooked, and it's difficult to imagine another game that would have had the same impact. The game is ruthlessly tough however, with slippery controls, a relatively small hit reach, and one-hit deaths there to punish you for just even one minor moment of imprecision. Despite being the game I've owned the longest, I've still yet to complete it, a barometer of how punishing the game can be. But don't let my lack of gaming skill put you off. Quite simply, this is a must-play for the Master System. Perhaps controversially for some, this is the only Wonder Boy game on this list, but in terms of its ease of accessibility and pick up and play nature, in contrast to the RPG elements of later games, which are still awesome games in their own right, this is the one game in the Wonder Boy series that I still find myself coming back to and regularly revisiting, and enjoying of course. Once more being a port of a game initially released in arcades, this Escape, later West 1 and Sega developed game, sees you taking control of the eponymous Wonder Boy, aka Tom Tom, as he looks to rescue his girlfriend Tanya, who has been kidnapped by the villainous King. At its core a straight up platformer, the game requires not much more than to go from left to right in as quick as time as possible, picking up fruit along the way as the vitality bar at the top of the screen continually depletes. To help Tom Tom in his mission, various items such as hatchets, fairies, and yes, a skateboard can be found in eggs scattered throughout each round. Control does take some getting used to at first. Running requires you hold on to the button 2, and longer jumps need you to press buttons 1 and 2 simultaneously. It is momentum based as well, meaning many jumps will require a run up beforehand. Timing and judgment are therefore crucial, but once this mechanic is mastered, a fun, well-paced game awaits. I am aware that this game does have its faults. Whilst catchy and fitting, the BGM does get repetitive, as do some of the rounds themselves. The 3 console follow-ups are also more fuller, well-rounded, some might say more epic games, with them having a greater emphasis on RPG and storytelling, with the 3rd game in the series, Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap, often featuring highly on many gamers and critics' best-ofs of the system. That said, whilst I enjoy the follow-ups, I am an arcade gamer at heart, and having played and enjoyed the original immensely, this game does an excellent job in replicating the arcade experience for a home console. For an untaxing, laid-back and entertaining platformer that asks little more than getting from A to B, yet still offers up a decent challenge nevertheless, this game more than fulfills that requirement, and is the primary reason why it's still to this day one of the games I regularly find myself playing. A game rarely talked about when the subject of best ofs and system classics are brought up, but this hack and slash style platformer, which draws inspiration upon Japanese mythology, easily more than holds its weight amongst the plethora of platformers found on the Master System, and as such is worthy of your attention, if you are willing to put in the time. You are Hayato, a fearless samurai warrior who is on a journey to recover 5 secret scrolls and the sword of the Dragon King. This he does by travelling across 16 Japanese provinces, whereupon 5 warlocks need to be defeated upon route to their castle in Edo. Visually, Kenseiden is one of the better games of its era, with much sprite detail present and darker backgrounds and colours in keeping with the game's eerie and mythological tone. The oriental tinged BGM, whilst not amongst the system's best, likewise ably complements the look and adds positively to the overall feel of the game. The premise is standard platforming fare, namely killing the enemies and getting to the end of each stage, but in saying that doing so is far from easy would be a massive understatement. Hayato is an impressively sized sprite for the system, but this alone makes him susceptible to being hit and receiving damage. On the first couple of plays, this game will doubtlessly cause much frustration. Your character is slow and underpowered. The initial wave of enemy attacks on the first level alone will seem too much if not approached correctly, and all the while questions begin to be asked in your mind as to whether this is a game worthy of your investment. The answer comes in the form of those classic arcade standards known as perseverance and mastery. Defeating the warlocks and recovering the scrolls garners Hayato new abilities, and these are crucial to advancement in the game. Although still not easy, enemy and boss patterns become more familiar, and a sense of progress is at last more pronounced. Truth be told, I hated this game when I first purchased it a few years ago, mostly for the reasons mentioned just now. But when I'm in the mood for a challenge, for a platformer that I know has a difficulty verging on the unforgiving and that is not going to give me a free pass early on, in knowing that my patience and resolve will be sufficiently rewarded, this is regularly one of the games I turn to, and a solid personal favourite of mine as a result. As much as I loathe, detest even, that overused and often ill-attributed YouTube phrase hidden gem, this is the one game for the Master System where this tag most certainly applies. A game which was criminally ignored and critically unappreciated upon its 1987 release, and is perhaps only now beginning to receive the plaudits and acclaim that it so deserves. You begin playing as JJ, a member of the White Knights, who are a peacekeeping force guarded with foiling the evil Norse Empire's takeover attempts of the planetary system. Your mission is to infiltrate their base, obtain 5 floppy disks, and to try and rescue 2 of your fellow friends, Apple and Champ, who are trapped inside. Exploring the base requires you to venture through a labyrinth of rooms, the majority of them with hidden locked doors which can only be opened by inputting a code on each room's computer. The code is made up of 4 symbols, and these are gained by destroying the pods. The symbols don't have to be entered in the correct order, but unless you have exceptional memory capable of being sustained over long periods of play, this will most likely require you to write them down in some form just to be sure. Enemy soldiers and other hazards will appear to make your life tougher, and your characters do have a life meter, which fortunately can either be replenished at the mothership's base, or with health items that can be found occasionally in the pods. As you explore, your characters can also level up, and this will be crucial for the latter stages of the game. This relatively simplistic and concentrated explanation, however, does not do the game-playing experience the required justice it merits, where Zillion refuses to hold your hand where there is no clear-to-follow map and no save or continue functions. This is a game that will both severely test your patience, memory and strategic nous, as well as requiring traditional gameplay and flair in dealing with the later, more intelligent enemies and navigating the increasingly hazardous rooms. It's a combination made all the better with the extremely satisfying gun sound effects. Once again catchy BGM, solid visuals, and although sharing echoes of Metroid and Impossible Mission, boasts an experience unique to anything else the Master System has to offer. Probably more a lost classic rather than a hidden gem, but however you wish to label it, still one of my absolute favourite games of the Master System. Next up, Fantasy Zone, a port of the game first released on the Sega System arcade hardware in 1986, before getting a full console release the same year. You control a courageous ship called Opa Opa, Sega's first and failed attempt of a mascot of sorts for the console, who is on a mission to restore peace to the fantasy zone that it inhabits. This you do by taking out the bases which spawn the various enemies in each level, with a boss fight at the end once these are all destroyed. Destroying the enemies and bosses earns you coins, which in turn can then be spent on acquiring power-ups, which sadly only have a limited usage. This in itself brings up a strategic element in knowing when best to use each power-up for a particular enemy or boss, and at what time and price, where for every time a power-up is purchased, it subsequently increases the cost should you wish to purchase it again. The game does retain each level being set horizontally on an endlessly repeating loop, a nod to Defender, the game said to inspire this one, but is sadly scaled down to meet the limitations of the Master System hardware. As such, Fantasy Zone is sadly absent of parallax scrolling, requires you to destroy 6 enemy bases per level rather than the 10 of the arcade edition, and further eliminates the backgrounds for boss encounters, with 2 of them being changed entirely. But for me, having never played the original, these are relatively minor niggles. Its charming, pastel-tinged, almost childlike graphics and cutesy feel, added to the quite bizarre and eccentric enemies, and quirky and insanely upbeat and catchy BGM, belies what is at its core a very tough and challenging shooter, but one in which somehow always leaves me with a smile on my face whilst playing. It's one of the few games I find difficult to not feel upbeat about, and for somebody who plays Pro Evolution Soccer and Street Fighter V online quite regularly, that's quite an achievement. This is a great example of a game that is simple to play, yet formidably difficult at the same time, and as an example of one of the best early shooters for the system, it's still one I find myself coming back to time and again. Despite the scandalously vacant cover art trying to steer you away, once you've fired this up on your Master System and given it a few plays, I'm confident you will too. Being that this entry is a port of a critically and commercially acclaimed Sega Mega Drive game, widely held as being a classic for the console and setting the standard for the side-scrolling beat-em-up genre period, I was initially wary of choosing Streets of Rage for this video. The 3 16-bit games in the series, particularly the second iteration, have brilliantly drawn sprites, graphics that superbly evoke the city under the chaotic crime-fueled midst of neon squalor, and a perfectly fitting soundtrack of booming club and house-influenced beats that complemented the tight, addictive, hard-hitting action. Any port to an 8-bit console therefore was bound to come up short, with the limited in-comparison hardware surely not being able to do any justice to its 16-bit counterpart. Although lacking in many of the features of its Mega Drive equivalent, most notably restricting enemy count to 2 at a time, and featuring no 2-player mode, Streets of Rage on the Master System is nevertheless a solid game in its own right, and a strong argument can be made for it being the best side-scrolling beat-em-up on the machine, no mean feat when compared to its opposition. The in-game story will be familiar to many of you. A once peaceful and prosperous city, now under the criminal rule of the evil syndicate, headed by its kingpin, Mr. X. Deciding to take matters into their own hands, 3 ex-cops, Adam Hunter, Axel Stone and Blaze Fielding must take out the criminal organisation's vast crew of thugs and associates that lie in wait, doing so face to face on the streets of rage. As per their Mega Drive counterparts, the three main characters each have their own strengths and weaknesses, along with movesets and moves unique to that character. The action is responsive, satisfying and well paced, in spite of the lack of more than 2 enemies on screen at a time. Although the characters and enemies themselves are a little on the miniature side, they are easily distinct and well represented. Special praise must go out to the end level bosses with their enhanced size and detail, even giving some Mega Drive games a run for their money. The level backdrops themselves stay true to the theme and mood of the 16-bit originals, and the soundtrack, composed once more by Yuzo Koshiro, whilst not on par with the Mega Drive's more superior audio capabilities, is still a worthy series of tunes in the spirit of the action taking place. The Master System version even offers its players with a brand new boss that awaits at the end of level 6, rewarding those who had not quite made the financial leap to the then current hardware. A port from a more powerful console it may be, but as far as ports go of this nature, Streets of Rage on the Master System is undoubtedly one of the best available, and on the many occasions where I just want a solid, top-notch and complicated game for my 8-bit beat-em-up fix, this is the game that I regularly go for, proving that to write off a game purely for appearing on more powerful hardware first is to border on the criminal itself. Reduced sprite size, shorter levels, excessive slowdown, harsh flickering. Normally any combination of these for a game in the 8-bit era would be justification enough for it to be reviewed in derogatory terms, written off, a reason to pass the game by. I'm not going to lie, R-Type does have all of these elements in check, but to ignore this game would be doing the system and yourself a huge disservice. This hands down is one of the best ports that the Master System would receive, and easily in the top 3 list of shooters released on the system, and one of its best games period. Like others in this list, R-Type was first released in arcades in 1987, having been originally developed by Irem. It then received a Master System port the next year through developers Compile, who had previously developed Ghostbusters and would also do so for the highly regarded Golbelius and Power Strike for the same platform. A side-scrolling shooter of the classic kind. You control the super secret R9 fighter spacecraft on a mission to protect the universe from the clutches of the evil Bido Empire. When compared to some of its contemporaries, R-Type adopts a more methodical pacing, with the emphasis being more on enemy pattern recognition and survival rather than simply destroying all and everything in sight. At first, your ship will be unresponsive, sluggish and devoid of serious ammunition. However, strewn throughout the levels are various power-ups that will be crucial to your progress. The most innovative and important of these weapons are the droid units, metal spheres capable of acting as a separate weapon and with the ability to connect to the front and rear of your ship, shielding you from oncoming enemies and projectiles. It's a clever form of strategy that will have to be factored into your plan of attack, and its mastery is paramount for the later levels in the game. Accepting the moments of enemy flicker and slowdown present throughout, with its excellent level design and some of the most memorable boss creations I have seen, this is still one of the best looking games in the system. I distinctly remember encountering the level 1 boss for the very first time as a 6-year-old, and feeling both in awe and horror as the screen faded to black, amplified with the music changing to one of impending danger and terror, and then seeing the slow reveal of an enormous, screen-filling red alien-esque beast with a scowling green head bursting out of its midsection. What an impression that made! And even now I still admit to getting goosebumps whenever I encounter it. The game's difficulty is legendary. One hit will cause instant death and will remove your ship of all of your power-ups accrued up until that point. It took me until my late 20s until I finally beat the game, and it still stands as one of my greatest gaming accomplishments. Receiving unanimous critical acclaim, R-Type is rightly hailed as a Master System classic, an absolute solid favourite. I am convinced that if you have not already done so, upon you picking up a copy and experiencing it for yourself, it will be one of yours too. Just going to go right out there and say it from the beginning. Castle of Illusion is a very special video game. Developed and published by Sega, it's a game filled with charm, warmth, affection for its lead character, varied and imaginative level design, excellent character animation, and ultimately raising the bar for what a platformer could achieve on an 8-bit platform. A game featuring a mascot aimed at children this may be, but this is a game that can be enjoyed by all and everyone, and is a superb addition to anybody's Master System library. You control Mickey, who is on the trail to rescue his friend Minnie, kidnapped by the wicked witch Mizrabel, jealous of Minnie's beauty and popularity. To do this, you must guide Mickey through 5 different levels, finding the 7 gems of the rainbow, before entering Mizrabel's castle and saving your friend from peril. Mickey can attack by picking up objects and throwing them ahead, or most likely by using his signature butt bump to bounce onto and off enemies. Levels are varied, often non-linear, and barely anything is wasted. They are densely populated affairs, requiring a fair degree of exploration and contain problem-solving elements that are both intuitive and a break from standard platforming fare found elsewhere. Playing up to the Illusion theme, the game is full of secrets also, with hidden items to be found to aid and replenish Mickey on his quest to complete each level. An end-of-level boss awaits at the end of each stage, and these are among my favourites for any platformer on the system, with them being very well sized and suitably themed to the level itself. Their attack patterns are often quite easy to pick up, but there will be a fair amount of problem solving and strategy required to work out what needs to be done. Graphically, this game uses bold, vibrant colours to great effect, and the attention to detail and certain background flourishes are amongst the best the Master System has to offer. As is often the case with top tier games, the soundtrack ably complements the theme of the level, or the situation that Mickey finds himself in. Although not classics of any kind, they are instantly likeable, with melodies that will stay in your head hours after the game is turned off. The difficulty of the game is just about right. Early levels, whilst not a walk in the park, ease you into the game, with the later levels being longer, more complex affairs. The game only has 6 levels overall, but a fair amount of time will need to be put into each for them to be completely mastered. Castle of Illusion received almost unanimously positive reviews upon its release, and it's a sentiment still shared to the present day. A Mega Drive version of the same name was also released around the same time, again to much positive acclaim, but refreshingly, the Master System game as seen here, although sharing many of the same level themes, is a completely unique game in its own right. Debate will forever rage as to which of the 2 games is the more superior, but that is an argument for another video. Based solely on its merits as a Master System game, this is arguably one of the best. A shining example of what can be achieved when much love is afforded into its development, with this translating into the experience gained by game players themselves. Such a positive experience was certainly the case for me, and will forever be one of my all-time favourite games for the console. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a fan of RPGs, never have been, never will be, but so good is this compiled developed game, released originally for the Japanese MSX console before being ported to the Master System in 1988, that even if you are of the same persuasion as myself, I am more than confident that you will fall under the same adoring spell that this action role-playing game cast over me many years ago. You play as Khaleesi, a young warrior on a quest to rescue Princess Rena, who we are told journeyed out to search for a magical herb to heal her sick father, but was captured by the evil Golbelius, a former tyrant of her father's kingdom and now ruler of demons who plague the valley where she is thought to have been taken captive. A valley ominously known as the Valley of Doom. In that much of the game sees you control a character with prominent green coloured features, who is armed with a sword and shield, with action taking place from a primarily top-down overhead perspective, and enemies that generate as soon as you enter a new screen. This game has heavily been called out as a Zelda and Zelda 2 clone, and in many cases this is correct, in that Golbelius does draw heavily from elements present in both of these games. But to write off Golbelius as a mere imitation would be to do it a great disservice to what it impressively achieves, and even adds to, from the grandiose source material it draws inspiration from. Golbelius mixes its vast overhead world with both side and vertical scrolling dungeons that must be journeyed through in order to defeat the demons that rule each landscape. These are hidden and often appear through striking particular objects or a certain number of enemies. As he progresses, Khaleesi's will obtain better weaponry and boots and other items, level up his powers and meet a varying cast of characters along the way, each espousing a quirky and charming ye olde English patter. Graphically, this is another impressive effort for the Master System, backed up by a fitting BGM, evoking a real sense of the mystical and explorative, as well as one of triumph and optimism, changing as it does upon the addition of a new weapon, thereby adding to a sense of progression. The game also has one of the most touching intros and endings that I've ever encountered in a video game, not just on an 8-bit system, but any system period. The haunting music, made more poignant playing on the slower PAL system, evokes strong feelings of immense joy, sadness, and for me now even a ghostly feel of haunting nostalgia. Watched for the first time after the several hours spent completing the game only serves to heighten the emotional impact. The Master System is also home to other RPG style games such as Phantasy Star, Golden Axe Warrior and Ys to name but 3, and a case can be made for each of these being superior in their own way. Maybe it's because it's my first, maybe because I haven't played enough of the others to fully appreciate their story, or maybe because it is in fact the better game. Golvedius is the one I turn to when I want my action RPG fix, a solid favourite not only from a young age, but one I'm sure that will remain so until I am physically unable to pick up a Master System joypad. Plug in and enjoy. It is one adventure worthy of your time. Arriving as the true mascot that Sega needed to finally march ahead of Nintendo in the so-called console wars of the early 90s, the Master System versions of Sonic the Hedgehog games were somewhat yet understandably slower and graphically scaled down efforts in comparison to their Mega Drive templates. Like many other games on this list however, the 8-bit counterparts embraced these perceived weaknesses and then turned them into strengths that in overshadowing these shortcomings so well, were able to become classic games in their own right. The first Sonic the Hedgehog game is a great example of this, with some going as far to say that this is the better game than the supposedly superior version that would gain all of the plaudits and attention on the newer, more powerful console. Developed by Ancient whilst being overseen by Sega and getting released in late 1991, the Master System version of Sonic was developed in tandem with the Mega Drives, and where a straight-up conversion became tricky to accomplish, a conscious decision was made to differentiate the games in each system. Whilst the two games therefore shared similar levels, each had different layouts, with the Master System being home to 3 new levels entirely: Bridge, Skybase, and Jungle Zones. You control Sonic, a fast, trailblazing, blue-coloured hedgehog with attitude, as he looks to rescue his animal friends who have been captured by the evil Dr. Robotnik and imprisoned in his army of robots. Your mission is to find the 6 hidden Chaos Emeralds across each of the 6 levels, before the final showdown with the Mad Doctor himself. Less speedier than his Mega Drive counterpart, Sonic still moves at a pretty brisk pace, with his primary mode of attack being his spin attack, making him invulnerable while doing so. Visually, although not as detailed as other games on this list, and a little flat in places, this is still yet another sharp Master System offering, with all levels memorable and distinctly unique to each other. The soundtrack from Yuzo Koshiro is excellent, particularly the latter 2 levels, which really heighten the sense of frenzy and danger as the difficulty amps up considerably. One of the particular strengths of the game is its varied level approach at a time when this had not yet been defined in the Sonic series. Subsequently, you have levels which have automatic horizontal scrolling, or in which Sonic must continually travel vertically without backtracking, and in tandem with staples such as the underwater zone, along with a vast maze-like zone, this really adds up to make a tremendously varied and challenging game. This is underpinned by the boss battles not allowing you to collect any rings, meaning you will have to be on top form to complete this one. Being the last Master System game to be released in the US, which at that point in time was largely under thrall to Nintendo, Sonic was a missing piece of the puzzle, the killer app Kickstarter that Sega needed to really make gains in the console wars. Yet where the Master System only made minimal impact in North America, added to the fact that it was the Mega Drive or Genesis version that got everybody talking, the merits of the 8-bit game and its place in history have tended to be overlooked. Fortunately, this was not the case in Great Britain, where Sega, and the Master System specifically, mostly reigned supreme. and indeed such was the popularity of Sonic's 8-bit venture that it would be eventually built into Master System 2 consoles as a packing game, and helping to further the console's life by another few years. Indeed, this was my first experience in playing the first Sonic game, and due to its challenging, engaging gameplay, excellent level design, tough but fair difficulty, and a character that exuded coolness, this has continued being a favourite of mine right up to the present day. Well, there you have it, 10 favourites of mine for the Sega Master System. Playing these games back for the purposes of capturing footage for this video was an absolute joy, a pleasure, and really helped to solidify in my mind that I was correct to focus on them in the first place. With that all said, what are your favourite games for the system? Do you share any that I have picked? Or would you choose 10 completely different games entirely? Comments are always welcome, but this is SMS Retro and it's goodbye from me, until next time.